Great. So we are now recording. Just welcoming everyone back to SWAB 2024. The committees have been hard at work. So part of tonight's going to be reviewing what folks have been working on, and talk about some of the work that we still have ahead of us. We also have a guest speaker tonight, talking about some of the sustainability efforts at JFK. No worries, Walter, that's totally fine. And once he joins, we can hear from him. But until then, we can continue with some of our housekeeping work. So it looks like we might be a smaller crew tonight, which is totally fine. We don't have anything to vote on, so we'll get updates on what folks are working on, updates on some upcoming events that people can be involved with.
Probably here.
And yeah, so let me just make sure. There were some issues with the link here for folks to join. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anyone.
Recording in progress.
One moment. I'm going to send this out to Google Group. If anyone has any upcoming events while I'm doing this, now would be a great time to share that. Send it out to I just sent that link out to some folks who indicated that they were having some difficulty finding the list. I confirmed with our guest speaker, but he's not on right now. But hopefully he'll be joining us soon, because it seems like a pretty interesting topic to hear about some of the sustainability issues at JFK. In a few moments. Some logistical things to report back on. So we've had a number of electronic votes, most recently one ending on January 10th. All of them related to the advocacy around restoring funding to community composting. All of those passed, and they were all joint efforts with the other SWABs. And so the other SWABs also endorsed and signed on to all of those letters. Some were going to the mayor, some were going to city council, and so those were all signed by SWAB, the other SWABs, and were delivered. So that work is still ongoing. There's a legislative meeting, which we'll talk a little bit later. But that's where a lot of this work has been done is in the legislative committee. Right. Speaker saying he's having technical difficulties. A lot of this work's been done through the legislative committee. And the Environmental Justice Committee, so we can hear updates. But everything that we've done in the off period and in the electronic votes have passed. But that's an update on that. We can record the actual vote counts in the minutes so that folks have that information. But just wanted to report back that they've all passed. Let me get our speaker set. Can you please? And there's a problem that we have with when you register, you're not actually able to send people the link to join directly. So I'm going to try and send this invite link to our speaker. See if that enables him to come in. Thank you everyone for your patience. I apologize. Let's see. Got some other folks joining in as well. Just update for folks, we're having some technical difficulties with our guest speaker. I'm trying to work with him to get him in, and we will resume moment. Let's see. Forward to it. Let's try.
Hey, Ryan, it's Kat Servino.
Hey,
I
how's
just
it going?
wanted, hey, good, how are you?
Good.
Normally, when I organize a Zoom, like I'll just create a Zoom and then copy the link and send it to everyone. Is that possible to do, like maybe in the future?
Yeah, I think we definitely can try that because we've moved away from requiring registration for the committee meetings. I know that there's been some issues with that as well, but at least with when you don't have to, you can just send the link and people can just click on the link and join the meeting right away. When there's registration required, you have to register to get the link. So I think, the benefits of that is it's like you get for people who are guests, you get email address, everything like that. But I think it's probably not worth the complications of this. If we didn't have that, I could just send him the link rather than a link to register. So yeah, in the future, I'll update this to be one where you don't have to register. It's just a link that people can join, and we can see how that goes.
That's great,
Ryan,
thanks.
I was actually able to register and join at the same time. It didn't send me a link.
Oh, it didn't.
It was one
Great.
so yeah.
Okay, hopefully that will work for our guest then, because I sent him at the bottom, it says like copy and invite link. So I sent that link and I'm hoping that he will be able to do that. Oh. Let's see. That will also make it easier for folks. We've also been doing the SWAB Google Calendar. So I don't know what what makes the most sense for folks. Like if people use Google Calendars, we can have the invite on that, so it just shows right up on your email. Or there's a way that you can take an existing Google Calendar and add it to yours. I don't know whether that's just creating more complexity for folks, but I do think that this registration step, if we have it, but it's just the same Zoom link every month, people can just click on that and join. I think that's how the other SWABs do it, and then you can just send out an email with the link, have it in the calendar invite. Trying to make it as easy as possible for folks. I know we have had some technical difficulties with this, and also with other folks not having the link, or having a link that's expired. Let's see if it.
While we're waiting, would it be okay if I send in a notice about something we're doing at Eastern Queens Align?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Please do.
Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year, Gloria.
Hey, Gloria.
Hey.
I'll actually chime in
Yeah,
that Beyond Plastics, the national chapter or organization is organizing a lobby day, an in-person lobby in Albany for mainly to advocate for the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act and also the Bigger, Better Bottle Bill. They've organized a free bus from Manhattan to Albany. So if anyone wants any more information on that, you can message me or I'll leave my email in the chat, but you can also go onto all the Instagrams and Twitters and find it there too. But happy to answer anyone's question if you're interested, especially if you live in New York, especially if you have a representative that is convincible. We are just 2 assembly members short of 76, which is when they bring it to a vote. So we need all the help we can get. Thank you.
thank you.
Hey, Ryan, I also just tried, I forwarded him the link that I got. Maybe that'll help.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think, yeah, so while he's working on that, we can just move on. He said he didn't need a ton of time for his presentation, and the rest can just be any questions folks have. So the first thing on the agenda after this was an update on the DSNY budget cuts. Oh, as I just moved on, here he is. Great. So that's should be working. That's great. Hello, welcome.
Hey, Carrie.
Hey guys, how are you?
Hey, sorry about that. We've had a number of technical issues tonight with people not being able to join. So we're going to be fixing that for future meetings, but I'm glad you're
No
able
worries.
to join
Yes,
us.
I am so happy to be here, and I'm sorry about the issues also on my end. I use Teams on my office, at my office. So when we try to do a Zoom, it's like a whole disaster.
Totally. Great. Well, I can pass it off to you. We were just about to move on to something, so something finished and something else was about to start. So have you jump in.
Cool. Yeah, great. I can share my screen and then I'll get to it if that's cool with everyone here.
Yeah, that's
I prepared a presentation to go over sustainability and particularly the waste management at JFK Terminal 4. Share screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Beautiful. Okay, great. I'm gonna go to the present mode. Let's see if we could do this. Okay, so can everyone see this?
Got it. Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, great. All right. Hi, everyone. Hope all is well. And my name is Gary Weinstein. I'm the Sustainability and Manager at JFK IAT. This conversation is to discuss the waste management and the sustainability initiatives at the airport. A little bit about JFK IAT. Oh yeah, so I wanted to preface it by saying if anyone on the call, if you guys have any questions, any comments, please feel free to interject, interrupt me. I like dialogue, so feel free to talk and ask any questions. Okay. So with that being said, about JFK IAT. JFK IAT is the terminal operator of JFK Airport's Terminal 4. Terminal 4 is one of the largest terminals in the US, if not the largest. In this past year, at the passenger count, overall, it was over 26 million passengers, and the peak on a day-to-day, and the highest amount, it was around 87,000 passengers. So enough to fill a football stadium or a concert hall. So just imagine all that waste on a day-to-day basis that is entering as well as that is going out of the terminal. Okay, so here I want to speak about our stakeholders and their priorities here. So first, about the stakeholders, there are a lot of stakeholders at an airport, especially an international air terminal. So of course we have our passengers who are considered in my customers, the security officers and the government agencies, investors and the board of directors, employees in the terminal. We have over, I believe it is 7,000 employees in the terminal. And they come in overnight, in the mornings. If it's a snowstorm, any kind of a condition, it is a 24/7 operation here at Terminal 4. We have our business partners and our tenants, all of our suppliers, upstream and as well as on the downstream. And here in this conversation, it involves on the local community. We are extremely active in the community. We volunteer at a lot of organizations in the Queens area. On this picture on the left, we had a volunteer day at Jamaica Bay Wildlife Refuge where we volunteered and we gave them a donation. And the volunteer and the trip, it was about to promote biodiversity in Jamaica Bay and to restore the shoreline that was affected by Hurricane Sandy. On the bottom, on the left is a picture of an Earth Day event in the terminal. It was done and to raise awareness about sustainability, about about the waste management, about the carbon initiatives as well. And over here on the bottom is the priorities. Okay, so number one, it is not in any kind of order. If it happens to be waste and recycling is the first one on the list, as well as water conservation, energy efficiency, indoor environmental air quality, food and beverage, the sustainability there, as well as the sustainable transportation. Any questions there? Any comments? No? Okay, great.
I have a
Okay.
quick question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Have you conducted a waste audit?
Yes. Oh, yes, we do audits. Yes, that's a question. So we do audits on a weekly basis of all of our vendors. So that means in the restaurants and the lounges, we have over 20 um restaurants on site and like bars. And we have around, I believe it's 7 lounges in the terminal. So my team and I, we do audits and we have it's a rating scale, and we rate their waste management performance on a weekly basis, and then we give them it is an average score on a monthly basis. And at the end of the year, our goal, if I get the budget, um, is to reward the highest scoring um, a lounge and the restaurant. Um, a big a challenge in the airport about the waste management is the retention of their staff. So it takes a lot of communication and the training and the retraining of the management. And it goes all the way. Sorry, it starts all the way and from the top. And with management, but then I need to reach out to the porters as well because they are the physical the movers of the recycling and the compost, and that is from the restaurants out to the service corridor, and then it makes its way into our compactors.
Excellent.
Yeah, sure. In terms of our staff and our tenants, we have a janitorial staff with over 2,000 employees. They are in charge of of the sanitation in the building, but also they are also overseeing the transportation of the waste in and out of the building, and that is a huge onus and a big a responsibility there. Any more questions on this?
Hey, Gary, how you doing? It's Mac.
Hey, hey, how are you?
Good, good. Quick question. I just want to know a little bit more about the composting on, at JFK. Like, how do y'all do that? Is it you have processors on site, or do y'all kind of send that stuff out to be processed off site?
Yeah, sure. That is a question. So, composting is a great initiative in terms of sustainability and in waste management. And so we do is we mandate that all other restaurants and the lounges, if they compost, and they bring it out in a closed container, and then we have a compactor inside. Oh, sorry, outside on the loading dock, and it is individualized only for compost. And then we put it all in a compost a compactor, and it gets brought out to a waste management a facility every month, even if it's not full. And the reason it being is a lot of people they may say, if it's not full, why are you bringing it off site? It could cause um, emissions, and it's a waste of gas, and as well as it is an expense. And the reason is because of the sanitation issues. If you have compost that is just is just stagnant, it could cause the sanitation issues, and it can attract um, out of bugs, out of rodents.
Yeah.
So, and a long story short, and to go off of that point, all of our compost, it gets sent to a farm upstate in New York. So it stays in New York. The farm is called McEnroe Farms, and they turn the compost into soil, and that soil and is made for the fruits and the growing and the vegetables. And the great thing about the composting here, by composting, it allows out of farms in New York to not have to spray a lot of pesticides, and they are allowed to grow their fruits and their vegetables in a more of an organic and a natural way.
Okay. No, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I am
Also,
sorry. Oh, go ahead. I wanted to
no,
bounce on Mac's question, but if you have something to add, then I'm going to wait.
yeah, sure. So I was going to say this about composting. Inside of the terminal, we do have a couple of compost bins on the customer facing side. So that's not really, so that is outside of the kitchens. However, we have done a study and a lot of analyses, and it shows that unfortunately, a lot of the passengers, they do not compost. And we've had a lot of signage, a lot of awareness, but because of that, it does it more harm than good because of we have to allocate our janitorial staff and to consistently clean out the compost bags every like hour. Otherwise it could cause infestation. So that's an interesting point and a drawback about compost as well.
Gary, Adam from Mr. T Karting, could you talk about the
Hey.
same challenges that you might have with the public area recycling in the customer
Ye-
facing?
Oh yeah, so challenges is a huge. Oh yes, there are a lot of challenges, especially here at an international um air terminal. I would say the language um barrier and is definitely a challenge. So on our bins and our signage, we are um we are in the middle of a campaign and to try to create some kind of a multi a lingual and um a signage a system on our waste bins. And also another a challenge is that overseas they have a recycling a system that's based it is based on a multi a stream a recycling system. And so they recycle their paper and it's separate, and their cardboard and it's separate, and their aluminum cans are all separate. Here it's a single stream a recycling a system in the United States. So if we aggregate it all and then we send it out and they sort through the recycling in the materials. But we separate everything based on cardboard. Um, and that's separate. And the single stream the recycling items are like any kind of glass bottles, any kind of aluminum cans, any kind and a paper that goes in the recycling bin. Another challenge is just that a lot of people at an airport, and I'm gonna be frank, they have a lot of stress on their minds, and their last thought is, okay, so where do I put this waste? If they have a flight to catch, or if they have kids, a lot of our passengers, if they throw out items in just any bin they can find, unfortunately. And then also another issue is the moving and of carts and of equipment in and out of the building. So we have, as I said earlier, around 85,000 passengers, 86,000 on a heavy day, and that is a lot of people in and out of the building. So we have passengers who are on golf carts because of accessibility um, handicaps. So we have a lot of golf carts in and out, in and out, in and out of the terminal. A lot of construction equipment is being transported in and out, and as a result, a lot of our trash bins, they need to be sturdy, and they need to be durable because they get into on a daily basis. So that is also another challenge as well. I believe there was a question. I just can't see anyone's face
Yeah,
because
I wanted to bounce on the question about composting.
Sure.
Originally, I wanted to keep my questions for the end.
No, please go ahead.
Since we're doing questions here, so that might sound like splitting hair, but it's food waste that you have. It's not composting. Composting is the process of transforming the food waste into a resource. And I think it's important to adopt the proper vocabulary for clarity when we are communicating with people. So I'm sorry to come at you like that, but I think it's really important to use the proper piece of vocabulary. Now, when it comes to the food wastes, so that's great that you managed to get the kitchens to be able to do the segregation. But I'm wondering what kind of tonnage do you have that comes out of there? Because 1 month of storage in a compactor sounds pretty excessive, especially that if you keep food waste or any waste, organic wastes, in a oxygen-less environment like in a compactor, you're going to produce a lot of greenhouse gases right here, right then. And for a month, it's probably producing something quite significant. So I'm wondering if there would be a way to shorten this, or there are techniques that allow to store the food waste for a while without the potential drawback of anaerobic fermentation that's probably happening and producing lots of nasty stuff. And so I don't know, it might be a cost issue. Maybe you've heard, maybe you haven't heard of basically pickling the food waste, which has the fancy word of bokashi, because I guess using a Japanese word sounds much fancier than pickling, but basically the principle is to pickle the food waste so it doesn't produce probably a little bit, but not nearly as much greenhouse gases, which already in an airport, there is a lot that's being produced. So if the food waste goes directly to the landfill, it's also a bad thing. But if it stays for a month, I wonder where is the benefit risk balance here when we're talking about that greenhouse gas pollution. And so if there will be solutions like either more like smaller container, smaller compactor, that might be also less expensive to run and more often being picked up, so it doesn't have time to get that nasty in there, or other things like bokashi / pickling of the food waste, so it can wait for longer time without the potential drawback of keeping it on site for such a long time without it being actually composted. Sorry, that was
Sure. No.
questions, but
so I'm gonna start on the later, if I may. I was saying that at the end of the month, even if it is not, even if it's not full, our goal is to move it out as soon as it gets full. Sometimes it is not full. And my question about the greenhouse gases is, okay, so I agree that greenhouse gases are emitted, it, I guess, from the food sources, but to transport it in and out, and when it's not full, I believe that is a cost, a benefit that we need to weigh as well, because I believe that there are CO2 equivalent emissions associated, and with the transportation of the compost, and when the compactor is not full, it just to get it out in a shorter way. I'm sorry, the food items on a shorter way. I believe that could be an argument there. Any follow-up on that?
I'll follow up
Thank you,
on
but I see that Bilal and Gil have their.
Sure, go ahead.
I'll let Bilal, I think he had his hand up first.
Hi, Mr. Weinstein. Thank you for coming.
Sure.
I have a question in regards to how is the food scraps, how are they transported to the farm? Is it by diesel truck or how is it? What's the route? I mean, what's the mode of transportation in terms of trucks that you all use to transport? And what is the route? Like I just looked at it right now, on Google Maps at least, and I know it takes it. The route right now at least takes it through going up to the Bronx. And the only reason why I say that is because historically, the South Bronx has been known to be asthma alley, in an environmental justice neighborhood. Even though this is Queens, I get it, but the route I'm just a little concerned about, and also the mode of transportation as well.
Yeah, sure. So that's a great a point. Okay, so the mode and the transportation is actually out of my scope. It is handled by a third party. They are the waste management the provider and the manufacturer, so they handle everything on their site. I totally agree about the asthma alley, and it leads to a lot of social inequities, a lot of health issues. I could speak to you about that for an hour if we wanted to have that conversation. And with that being said, are there a lot of I guess of farms and or facilities in the Queens area that accept the food scraps?
I'll go ahead and take that question and ask or like make my comments as well.
Sure.
I don't know that there are a lot of I don't know that there's one compost processing facility in Queens that accepts the full urban diet, which you probably include meat, bones, and dairy. I'm sorry, I came on
Yes, we do.
the call, so I don't know the full details. So there's probably nothing in Queens for you to send it to because of the fact that it has meat, bones, and dairy and the scale at which you're probably having. But my main comment was that I was just wondering about the new commercial zone laws. You talked about, and I'm sorry again, I missed most of the presentation. I came in with some of the questions, but I think I know what's going
Don't
on.
worry about it.
But it
I'm
sounds
on the
like
second slide still, so don't worry about it.
it sounds like you're collecting organics from the new terminal, and I just wonder, like, is there other organics at the airport, or which do you know the commercial zoning area that you're in, and which haulers will be servicing that area once these commercial zones are implemented? And are you working with anyone else in your district to get the same hauler so that I know you mentioned that you didn't think that you might have something full every week. It might be monthly pickup, but if you're working with a lot of other people and there's one truck coming every week, they might as well stop and pick up for you too.
Yeah, sure. And that makes sense, and that's a good point. About the other organics, I'll answer that question first. We do recycle our cooking oil and all the oil in the kitchens, and we send that offsite, and they turn that into biofuel. And that then and the goal of the aviation industry as a whole, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of a terminology. It's called SAFs. It stands for the Sustainable Aviation Fuels. So those it is a substitute for a traditional jet fuel, and that is a blend of some kind of a form. I believe it is kerosene. And so SAFs are derived and from the sustainable aviation fuels that come from either in our kitchens on the cooking oil or the manures and the feces, as well as our crops on the farms. So that's so that's just a little bit of a background there on the SAFs and the cooking oils. In terms of the zoning, that would come down to the Port Authority because they are the governing institution of the terminal. I'm just the terminal operator, so unfortunately that would be out of my hands. If that is a good point, though.
They work with one of the potential awardees for that zone. And they bring their material to the closest organics processing facility also.
Great, thank you.
Any more questions on this slide?
Yes, this is Reverend Thorbs.
Hey,
Hi, how are you? When you spoke
good, how are
about
you?
farms, have you considered the farm in Flushing? I know there's supposed to be a farm in Flushing. Has that been something on your radar?
It is, but as I said, it is kind of out of my hands because it is based on the waste management the company. They have the contract there. Um, it is a conversation. How big is the farm there? I'm
I
not sure
believe
of the size.
I believe it's on Queens College campus.
Okay.
Yes, Queens Farm below.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
know it's
I
been
could
in
go
discussion.
into our numbers on a yearly basis, but our compost or the food scraps, I should say, and the organics, the tonnage is around a little bit under 20 tons a year, I want to say. Or is it 25 tons? Yes, that's the amount.
Okay.
Any other questions about this slide?
Thank you.
I
Sure.
just
Hi,
have,
this is Catherine. Oh,
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Catherine, why don't you go ahead? I was just going to say that I'm curious to see the rest of the presentation because Gary is only on like the third slide. So
Yeah, it's
why don't you
fine.
ask your question and then it would be great if
You know, it's
Gary.
great questions.
okay,
It's great.
great. Thank
I
you
just
for
want to see
your,
everyone's face. Okay, so I can see
yeah,
your
I'm on
face
my
now.
phone and I
Oh,
can't
yeah, your
figure out
phone.
how to
Okay.
do my face, but I'm Catherine
Okay.
Servino. And I'm curious about the numbers because for an airport like JFK and Terminal 4, where you said there were what, 20-ish restaurants and bars, for it to take a
Right.
month to fill up a container seems like it should be filled up long before that if everybody's, adhering to the program. So if you could just speak to that, or maybe
Yeah.
you will be speaking more to that. Thank you.
No, it's a great comment. No, and to answer that is we have in multiple compactors. We have over, I want to say 7 compactors, or is it 8? And it's split up into recycling, in a into organics and into cardboard, and just the regular trash. So that's why. Any
Are you
other?
saying because you're compressing the material? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that there is a multitude of compactors. So I have about 2 or 3 of the compost compactors on site. And then also another issue about the organics is to get the buy-in from all of the restaurants. A lot of their staff, a lot of the employees, they were never educated and are trained uh, on the need to separate organics and their food scraps. And so it's like having to sit down and to train them on a weekly basis and a monthly basis. And as I spoke about earlier, a challenge at an airport is the retention staff members there.
Just, I don't want to continue the back and forth too long, but I'll just say this. That seems
Go
to
ahead.
me a wonderful avenue for intervention with the management staff, the longer term employees, to make sure that's part of their onboarding process, and to have it be somehow built into like the required review task, you know,
Of
or
course,
something like
of
that.
course.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, and I can assure you it is. A lot of our food vendors, they are good partners, but their number one objective is to keep the operation up and running. Unfortunately, the way that this economy and it runs on, and waste management is not their priority. And no matter how many times I could speak to them, I could have my staff, I could speak to them, I could have my commercial team hold them accountable. Um, Unless you find them and you hurt their pockets, it is very hard to get them and to focus on the waste management as a 1A. I understand operations and the customer as service is a huge objective, but one of my biggest hurdles, but also opportunities, as you said, is to push this. All right, I'm gonna go to the next slide if that's cool, and with everyone. Okay, so I'm here. Okay, so here are just some highlights and initiatives about sustainability. So at JFK IAT, it became the first pre-existing air terminal in the U.S. to be awarded a LEED Platinum. The LEED, it is organized by the U.S. Green Building Council, and they award you points in the rating system based on your energy performance, on the waste management, on your standing in the community, on your indoor air quality, and a bunch of other KPIs. And I'm not going to go into. Okay, second is our completion of our carbon reduction roadmap. We have created a strategy for us to reduce our scope 1 and our scope 2 emissions. By 2030, the goal is to reach a 50% reduction in our scope 1 and our scope 2, and our goal by 2050 is to become a net zero. And before I get asked the question, how about the airlines and the pollution from airplanes? That is out of our scope. That would be considered our scope 3 emissions as a terminal operator. And then, and the third highlight is about our diversion rate, and that is the purpose of this call. We have experienced an increase in our diversion rate on a year-over-year basis, and we are the leader inside of JFK as well as in the aviation space for our robust waste management program. Any questions here? Awesome. So here I'm going to talk about waste management, our strategy and the mission. The mission, it is pretty simple. It is to maximize all of the resources and to minimize our impact on the environment, while partnering up with our stakeholders and our tenants. We have a pledge and to forge a greener path and for the benefit of all our stakeholders. And by controlling how we handle our waste, we can do a lot of beneficial objectives in the community, as well as and for future generations. We abide by the 3 Rs. I'm sure that everyone on this call, and they can recite them in their sleep. It is and to reuse, and to reduce, and to recycle. I think I did that out of order. I apologize. Any questions? Okay, here are the components of the waste management of the program on a macro a level. I spoke a little bit about the particular ones, but here I will go over in a highlight. So we have a system. It's based on SSR. We have a composting a program that's for our food, our waste, and our organics. We have a garbage that we sort. And we recycle our cardboard and we separate it. We have a robust e-waste a platform that we recycle a lot of our, if not all of our electronics. As I spoke earlier about the cooking oil, we have a a container, I should say, for our bulk items, and those it could range from any kind of a table out to a cabinet, out to a piece of machinery. And a lot of times it gets exported offsite, and then it gets broken down. And then I believe the stats on that are 90% of those items and the materials, they do get recycled. And then we have a robust donation platform where we donate a lot of our furniture, of our items, and the materials that are salvageable, that are in good a condition, and that there is a need. And so we partner up with a lot of non-for-profits in the Queens area. In particular, the non-for-profit who we donate a lot of our items to is the materials for the arts. I'm sure that someone on this call, they are aware of them and they deal with them. Any questions of the components of the waste management program here?
If I may, it doesn't seem like there is any, so especially when we're looking at food wastes, like in the US, there is an estimated, I think it's the USDA estimate about 40% of the food production is wasted before it even reaches the consumer. I suppose that this ballpark estimation is probably not too far from the reality in an airport where it's only food vendors, and it's not like it goes to a fridge or something like that. I wonder if there is, at least on the food vendor side, I understand that for the passenger, people are just passing by. It's complicated to find a way to communicate efficiently with people who are just passing by. But it doesn't seem like there's an education component to reduce the food wastes at the source of food waste, which is the food vendor who are preparing the food themselves. And I think that would be pretty interesting to see that here. Is there a reason why it's not here, or is it being thought of for a future planning?
Can you say that again about the education aspect? I think I missed that. I'm sorry.
So,
I wasn't
like
following.
in the waste management program, I think there's a big piece here missing, especially when we're looking specifically at recycling and food waste and reusing, by the way, and reusing is an education component to make sure that there is less waste in the first place.
Sure.
Be managed. That's what I mean.
Sure. Yeah. we try to educate our stakeholders, and I actually have, it's on another slide. We have introduced a technological innovation that it raises awareness and it also educates our passengers. I'll speak to you about that in a little bit. I'm almost there. Also about the food waste, if I may, um, we do donate any food, any sandwiches that are in a closed container, out to a non-for-profit as well, and a local church. We are not allowed to donate any food that has been open because of sanitary, and health issues as well.
There's a Good Samaritan law that actually does allow you to donate food if it is open, as long as it's not really contaminated.
Sounds good.
Hey Gary, I just
Hey.
had a question, I guess, on the donations piece. Because there's a lot of organizations and places within the JFK area, like the local proximity, that probably could benefit from, I guess, some of the donations. How are people able to, I guess, gain access to that portion?
Yeah, sure. It's a great a question. We are involved in the community a lot. We have a For Good committee and a For Good a program. We have a network of a lot of non-for-profits, a lot of churches, a lot of the religious institutions in the community. And whenever we have items, if we if we reach out to them, and then I have a list. The great thing about the materials for the arts is they have a robust a list of schools that they know it would accept things, items, I should say. And so I reach out to them if they don't have a use. If they reach out to their contacts as well, and they set me up with a school. The a challenge about the donations is the space in the terminal. So when a vendor or my terminal or my organization, we have items that are going to be donated, if the turnaround time to get it outside of the terminal, it is extremely short. And because there is a lack of space in the terminal, there is not a lot and of storage opportunities. So we need to find a recipient on the faster side. So that's what is extremely important as well.
Got it, got it. Cool. Is there any way that we could submit names to be on that list for you?
Yes.
Where?
Yes. At the end of this call, I have my contact information. That would be greatly appreciative. If there is a list of non-for-profits that would be interested. And the thing is also they need to have a truck and then bring it out to the loading dock in our terminal. A lot of these, and not-for-profits, they don't have a truck, or they don't have, or it could be, or they'll say to me, "Oh, I need to get back to you in a couple of weeks," and unfortunately, I don't have that time. So then I have to go down the list.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. It's a good question though. And another a comment about the donation and the platform. In the past, before my team was was involved, a lot of our vendors they never ever thought about donating their furniture. So we have, as I said, a lot and of lounges, and they're very high end um spaces. So they get new furniture on an annual basis, and we made it a notion, and it's almost a mandate. I mean, it's very hard to make it in a contractual obligation, but they are all aware now that if they are getting any new items, any new pieces of furniture, they need to contact um, in my team, and we'll set up a donation. And I'm talking about beautiful couches, TVs, chairs. We donate it all. Also on this list, and that's not on the list, I should say, are the pallets. Pallets are extremely abundant in the terminal. We have a lot of food, a lot of items, and they get shipped in on pallets and they get shipped out on pallets. We also have a program where we try to recycle all all of our pallets, and that does include the pallets that are broken as well. Anyone here in the construction industry? Cool. No one.
E-construction.
Yeah. Okay. Do you deal with a lot of pallets in construction at all, or no?
Same as you, you know, get stuff delivered in pallets, and then you have a bunch of pallets.
Yeah. Are you finding it an issue that a lot of your delivery of your drivers are not picking up all of the pallets, like if it's broken?
We don't really deal with as many pallets as you do.
Okay. Yeah, because
But
we
yeah,
deal with
that's an
a lot
issue.
of pallets.
I do stuff in industrial business zones. There's pallets all over the place.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
problem everywhere.
Yeah. And unfortunately, in the market nowadays, the market it has gone down in terms of value of the pallets. But we
Is
say
re
to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
is reuse an option with those?
Yes, it is. And so, if it's not broken,
Mm.
but a lot of the times, the truck drivers, they treat the pallets as if it's a as if it's an article of garbage. Um, and they bang on it, and they move it, and with the conditions, snow, ice, a lot of times the pallets they remain outside, and they break down and they erode. But if we have a mandate where we say that our drivers, if they drop off any pallets, they have to pick up at the same at the same number of pallets back in their truck. And we have a company who specializes only in pallets, and they pick up um any of our broken ones. And so that is a big boost, an extreme help.
And I know
in
they have
certain-
nails in them, but they are compostable in the traditional sense.
Some pallets
Yeah.
have are treated with various chemicals, and they
Yeah.
should not be composted in the traditional sense. They could possibly be composted in the non-traditional senses, but and that's another thing with reuse. Some people like to use pallets for craft, like DIY projects, but oftentimes people don't want those ones that are treated with chemicals.
I
Sure.
wonder why they treat them, considering, that's an extra process, but I don't know that much about that.
Presumably
Thank
they would
you.
last longer if they're treated. So there's a wide variety of like pallets. There's the really cheap ones that are gonna break the first time you use them, and there's the
Yeah.
ones that last a while, and then there's even plastic ones.
Yep.
Of course.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is also another issue. the pallets, they range in their sizes. But on the reusable front, our company who picks up the pallets that are broken, they chop them down into small articles. Um, I believe into a wooden like fragments, and they send it off to another a company, and they use the chopped up wood into some kind of a source. I'm not sure of the specific source, but I know that it does get um, reused. I'll have to get back to you guys on that one.
Thanks.
Of course. Any other questions on this slide? Okay. In terms of everyone's time, I'm gonna go a little faster. It just goes. I see the time here, and I don't want to hold anyone up. So I'll just go through the highlights here. We had a diversion rate of 58%, and and it's pretty good. That is above our goal. And the goal every year is to have an increase. And I would say the terminal average in the aviation space for an existing a building, the diversion rate goal is 50%. So we have exceeded that. SSR, we had a tonnage of around 1,600 tons of SSR. And the tons of the furniture slash equipment that was donated out to nonprofits, it was just under 14 tons. So and it's pretty good, honestly. And the cardboard, it remains a big a number because of all of the packages. I first see that a number increasing every year because of the amount of the deliveries. And the cooking oil, it was around 89 tons. On the left, we have installed brand new recycling as well as our trash bins. And the key thing about these bins is the signage. The signage is extremely important. And the goal of the signs is to make it transparent and to display, and not only on the wording, but also to have a visual representation of the items. And I spoke earlier about the durability. These bins are stainless steel. So I apologize about this comment this over here. I guess my template it was showing it as that. I don't know how that happened. I apologize in advance. Any questions on this slide about the numbers? Awesome.
Do you look to,
Okay.
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
I always,
Go ahead.
do you look to reduce as well as divert more? Is there like a reduction goal?
Yes,
as
that's
well as-
always, yeah,
Okay.
it is a part of the mission here. We do encourage our stakeholders and our vendors. We have uh, our staff members internally, we hand out a utensil kit. So we say, hey, if you're going to eat in our kitchens, um, instead of having a plastic a utensil or even a compostable one, that we handed out, it is a reusable kit for all of our staff members. Also in terms of the reuse of our water bottles, we have several stations for our staff members and the passengers, and to refill it in their water bottles as well. We also have the liquid capture stations. So when a customer is about to go into the security in the TSA line, they can dump out their water or their liquids in a container, and then they can proceed um, into the check-in line. And what that does is it reduces the amount in a pounds in the garbage, because if you're going to dump a water bottle in the trash, um, it does increase the weight of the bag, as well as it could cause some kind of a leak and a janitorial issue as well. But it does reduce the amount of space in our in our waste bags.
Gary,
Makes
is
sense.
the
Thank you.
the SSR, is that recycling, single stream recycling?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Any other questions on this slide? All right, so I guess I apologize about the spelling error. I was having issues on my computer. Innovation, I guess it got cut off. I don't know. I don't know how this happened. Innovation and the waste um, and management. So uh, this picture is a picture of Oscar. It is an artificial intelligence based a waste sorter. So when a customer, they go um this article of technology, Oscar, it will scan the item in the customer's hand, and then it will direct them into the correct bin. So we have a compost bin, a recycling bin, and and a landfill bin, as well as a liquid uh, a capture station, and that is not in this picture here. So, and the goal of Oscar, it is to increase the diversion rate, but also it is to create an education and an awareness opportunity for our passengers, so they can understand what exactly goes in the single stream, in the recycling or the compost or the landfill. I know that was a comment earlier made by a member of the call, so I wanted to speak about that. This is a way for us to it's a way to gamify, as well as and to reach the younger generations about how fun waste management it can be. I know that a lot of other people outside of the waste management world and the sustainability um, world, they don't think of waste management as something that could be entertaining, educational, and exciting. This is a way for it to happen. I spoke about earlier about the installation of the new of the waste bins, and we have gotten a lot of good um, feedback about the bins, as well as it allows our janitorial staff and to remove the bags in a more of an effortless um a campaign, so they don't have to hurt their back, and they could just open up the bin, and they could pull it out, so it's a lot more accessible as well. Also, all of the restaurants inside of Terminal 4 are are a green a restaurant certified, and that has been a huge accomplishment here. And we have updated our compactors, and we, as I spoke about earlier, we have a compost, a compactor, and cardboard, and we separate that all out. Any questions on this? Awesome. I believe this is my last, oh yeah, my last slide. So here is my contact information. If anyone has any kind of questions, any follow-up, if you want to send me that email about the non-for-profit, I would appreciate that as well. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And I thank everyone here for the opportunity.
Hey, Gary, I do have
Yes.
a question. I'm just curious. So this is everything that's happening at JFK, or at least
Of a
at
Terminal 4.
your terminal. Do you
Yes,
know,
correct.
are the other terminals, do they have similar waste management strategies? And I'm just curious about, like, if you have an idea about standards in the airline industry, because of course in Queens we have JFK and LaGuardia. And I'm just curious if you know
Sure.
if this is something that's standard within the industry, or just curious.
Yeah, sure enough, so that's a great a question. So in terms of the other terminals, I do not know their specifics, but I know that the Port Authority, they as I spoke earlier, they are the governing institution of the airports. They have a set of requirements that all of the terminals they need to abide by. And so they need to have a diversion rate of a certain a percentage. I believe it is 50. And they need to show um, an overall increase in their percentage on a year-to-year basis in the diversion rate. And about that comment, I totally agree. I think that it would be great and to have a member of the Port Authority on a call as well because I speak to them a lot on a daily basis, but they are the governing institution. So they, in terms of the regulations, they would be the contact and to speak to that platform.
Hey, Gary, if there's a person at the Port Authority that you could recommend, could you send me that information and then we
Yes, I
can,
definitely can.
that would be
Yes,
great. Thank you.
yep, yep, I definitely can.
I have a question too.
Sure. Hey, what's up?
So through the organization I represent here, which is Beyond Plastics, we are working with Assemblymember Kristen Gonzalez about a plastic water bottle ban in all ports of New York City. I'm just wondering if you knew about that, or how do you think, that would go over?
Okay, so me as a sustainability, as a nut, I think that's amazing. I love it. But if you speak to my commercial team and my vendors, they're not a proponent of it because end of the day, as I spoke about earlier, the the economy and the sales are extremely important. And I know that a lot of our vendors, they make a lot of money off the sales um, of water bottles. I can assure you though that we have it mandated that if not all of our vendors, if they need to be able and to sell a reusable a bottle in their store. So for example, if you go into um, Hudson News in our terminal, they do have a reusable a bottle that is for sale. I think
Yeah,
that
because
ban it's a fantastic initiative. I would support it
when
again
I
100%.
believe Seattle and San Francisco airports have done it. There's a lot of aluminum water bottles and a lot of extra refill stations, but so they
Yeah,
do. There's still some amount that's being sold,
yeah.
but they just
If I
banned the
can,
plastic.
yeah. And so if I could speak to that about Seattle and San Francisco, and it was a great initiative, but we found and from our analysis and the feedback that it was not equitable because some of the passengers who do not bring a reusable a bottle, they'll say, "Oh, how do we get access into water?" So that did cause a a bit of an issue that was not spoken about. And then the issue comes, are you going to be able to provide a reusable bottle to and to everyone? And if so, how much of a cost is it going to be? So there's a lot of economical and social factors that we need to account for. I see Bilal and is making an emoji. So what and is your comment there?
No, I'm just thinking about it. I'm just thinking about what you're saying. You know, it is an economic, it is about social economics. You know, when I
Yup.
think of sustainability, I'm thinking about social economics, I think about equity, I think about environmental injustice, you know, so it is a tightrope for a lot of people to manage, especially those in the industry. And then how does that correlate to the consumer? So it's not easy, but I think we definitely need to make some more strides and more efforts to try to figure out how we can reduce some of these plastics. And you know, when it comes to our food scraps, it's just an overall way that, you know, we need to put our heads together to really think about how we are preserving our environment. Everybody, the bit from corporate down to the consumer.
Yes, I agree, honestly. I totally agree with you. And the factors involved, it's a lot. It's like if it was up to us, it would be okay, so let's ban it. But if unfortunately there are a lot more external factors involved.
I don't know if we have anything else to do during this meeting. I have a comment, but and I'm enjoying the conversation, but if we have something else to do in this meeting, we should probably move on to it. I will say before we do that, though, that NYC Water shows up at lots of events. They give free water bottles to New York City residents all over the place. It would be a huge marketing thing for them to be at the airports to talk about how great New York City water is. And just it's going to be impossible to ban it because the commercial industry does not allow it. Their lobbying does not allow it. So short of banning it in New York City, I think it would be really smart for the city, maybe LaGuardia, to team up with Mayor Adams, who would love to talk about how great New York City's water is and brag about it right there as people entered in at the one of the greatest airports in the world and get that bottle, that reusable bottle that they're going to have the entire trip, and then they're going to have a souvenir when they get home, and they're going to remember, damn, that was good New York City water.
Yes, amazing. I'm sorry about this. I got my dog in the background. She is it's a rescue dog, so that also is my pitch there, and to be sustainable and rescue animals. Um, but Gil, about that point, and I'll sign off. We have a celebration every single April, Earth Month. I host a lot of businesses, a lot of non-for-profits. I hosted at Buffalo Exchange. It's a thrift store in New York City. It's a local based, and we spoke about the need and to reuse our fashion items. So I would love to speak to the to get the contact about the water about the non-for-profit and to bring them in April. I think it could be a great opportunity there.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for coming and talking with us.
Awesome.
And thanks for the time check there, Gil. I was talking with the committee chairs behind the scenes to make sure we were able to continue this conversation because I think it was very worth having. So thank you again for presenting, and sorry everyone for the technical difficulties at the beginning. Really quick, the only announcements I wanted to make before we close for the evening was the legislative committee is meeting over Zoom tomorrow. All of this is on our website on the calendar. There's the Zoom link, the time, and everything. But the legislative committee is meeting tomorrow. The Environmental Justice Committee is working on scheduling their next meeting. It will either be Friday or Monday. And the Education and Communication Committee met yesterday. and are looking to meet the third Tuesday of the month. So the Tuesday right before our monthly meeting. So next month will be the next education and communications committee meeting there. All of that once the details are set, the times, the Zoom link, everything will be on our calendar. But otherwise, that's where we're at. Thanks again, Gary, for that presentation. It was really informative, and I think we have a lot of next steps for us as well to get you information, to reach out to some other folks, and yeah. So with that, I'll ask: is there a motion to adjourn?
I so moved.
And a second. And all in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, everyone.
And thank you guys
Thank you, Gary.
again.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary, so much. Thank you.
Thank you guys. This is a great opportunity and a forum, and I hope to become involved in the future.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Awesome,
much.
guys.
Thank you, everyone.
night.
Have a good
Good
night.
night.
Have a great night, guys. Thank you.
Good night.
Is Catherine on? No.
She signed off.
Does anyone, I don't know if you're allowed to share her email, but she said she was interested in, or she asked me if her assembly member